Bounty. Transparent sea, white sand, coconut palms. That's how Bounty looks in the advertising of the chocolate bar. Nothing in common with a real Bounty with a bay on Pitcairn Island, lost in the Pacific Ocean. This island can be called a paradise. It has rocky shores and not a single beach. But there's an incredible story that found room for adventurism, romantic passions, as well as widespread drunkenness, mass murders, and dictatorship. Finally, in 2004, the world was shaken by news that ultimately tarnished Pitcairn's reputation. But let's take it one step at a time. The small Pitcairn Islands are located in the southern part of the Pacific Ocean. It is covered with rocks and volcanic cliffs, as well as dense tropical jungles. The temperature there is around 25 degrees Celsius year-round. Surprisingly, the island has plenty of fresh water. Everything blooms and grows abundantly. And now we move to the key event of our story, to the voyage of the ship Bounty. The ship was supposed to reach Tahiti, where the breadfruit tree grows, collect seedlings there, and load them on board. A few words must be said about Tahiti at the time. Otherwise, you simply won't understand the atmosphere. Landing on the shore, the English sailors saw a blooming island, extremely hospitable local residents, and even more hospitable local women, who had rather peculiar and free sexual mores. Tahiti was bursting with food and with rum, which the locals presented to the English sailors as a sign of respect. And obviously, after the prudish English mores, after the grey skies of London, the dirt of the ports, and the perpetually hungry life of a sailor, this island seemed to them a true paradise. And when the officers told the sailors to prepare for the return journey and load onto the ship, not everyone wanted to go back. Finally, after 24 weeks, having collected 115 seedlings of the breadfruit tree, on April 5, 1789, the Bounty completed its mission and set off on the return journey, leaving Tahiti behind. However, on April 28, in the middle of the ocean, a mutiny broke out on the ship. Its leader was a man named Fletcher Christian, and he was not a pirate-looking sailor. He was the deputy captain, an officer from a wealthy London family, who enjoyed the strong support of the crew. Christian had already had clashes with the captain before. Once he accused him of stealing coconuts and practically brought him to tears. And according to Fletcher himself, he even threatened to flog him with a cat o' nine tails. In addition, the deputy captain was already practically living in a marriage with a Tahitian woman, and in this he was not alone. Many sailors wanted to stay in Tahiti, but if you imagine these mutineers as pirates like Long John Silver, then you are not quite right. Yes, the majority were sailors, but there were also junior officers. These were often children of rich aristocrats who were taken on this voyage, so to speak, through connections. Parents placed their children on the ship so that they would gain naval experience and make a good officer career. But apparently, even the children of rich aristocrats were impressed with the atmosphere of Tahiti. Many of them were already cohabiting with local women, and some with more than one. Without these officers, the mutiny would have simply fizzled out because the sailors did not know how to use charts, navigational instruments, and generally lead the ship anywhere. But since the mutiny included junior officers, it was successful. These rebels put Captain Bligh, officers and part of the crew who supported them into a boat and cast them adrift in the ocean, while they themselves turned the Bounty back to Tahiti. However, having reached the Paradise Islands, they quickly began to understand that they acted, so to speak, on emotions, and soon a punitive expedition would come after them, and they would be hanging from the yards. As was customary for mutineers of those times, a conflict arose, during which the mutineers divided into two groups. One group, under the leadership of midshipman Peter Heywood, decided to stay in Tahiti. The other group, led by the main conspirator Fletcher Christian, who had stirred up this entire mess, boarded the ship Bounty and decided to flee from justice somewhere else. However, let's return for a moment to the boat that was cast adrift in the middle of the ocean. It contained Captain Bligh and loyal crew members. It drifted in the ocean 56 kilometers away from the nearest island of Tofua, At first, Bligh headed to this island hoping to replenish provisions and water supplies, but the natives there turned out to be extremely hostile, and in the confrontation one crew member died, and Captain Bligh and his team managed to escape by a miracle, setting off from the island. And for 48 days, the experienced captain led the remnants of his crew to salvation. Out of 18 people, he lost only one, and eventually the boat was rescued. After a while, the sailors and captain found themselves in England, where they reported everything. Bligh can really be called a lucky captain. He will later have to endure another shameful mutiny, the so-called Rum Rebellion, but that was in Australia. However, his fate is a separate story. In England, they learned about the mutiny and organized a punitive expedition. The warship Pandora set out in the Pacific to capture and deliver to trial in England the mutineers of the Bounty, which it successfully did. The 14 sailors who remained on Tahiti were arrested on March 23, 1791 and brought to trial, where incidentally 4 of them were acquitted. The rest were sentenced to hang, but at the last moment, the king pardoned 2 of the men, but unfortunately, the punitive expedition never found the Royal Navy ship Bounty on Tahiti, which was their primary target. The locals told that before sailing away, on the Bounty they loaded cows, chickens, pigs, goats, and even cats, as well as seedlings of useful plants. There were 9 crew members left on the ship. They took with them 6 Tahitians, whose status was little different from slaves, as well as 12 Tahitian women. Moreover, each European got a woman, but the 6 slaves only got 3 amongst them. And understanding that the Gallos evaded them in any of the colonies, the ship set out in search of a new life. For this purpose, the new captain of the ship, Fletcher Christian, chose the small island of Pitcairn, which had been discovered only 20 years prior. Entry from the logbook of Captain Philip Carteret, who discovered this island. We sighted land to the north of us. Upon approaching the island the next day, it appeared as a large rock rising out of the sea. As this land was discovered by a young gentleman, the son of Major Pitcairn of the Marine Corps, we named it Pitcairn Island. Due to the strong surf, we could not dock to explore this island, and it seemed that this island was the perfect place to hide. Its position was wrongly charted. It was away from the shipping routes. There was no bay where a warship could dock, and in general, one could only approach the island in small boats. The island had fresh water. It was green, blooming with a superb climate, and the mutineers from the Bounty decided to stay here. The new settlers appreciated the island for what it was, truly a slice of paradise. There they found breadfruit, planted sweet potatoes and yams, which they brought with them. The settlers built several homes and divided the land among themselves. By the way, the land was quite fertile, but the English divided it into 9 parts. The Tahitians did not receive a single piece, and obviously, their dissatisfaction grew. Apparently, on Tahiti the sailors had promised them that they would be full-fledged members of the crew. However, upon arriving at Pitcairn, the Tahitians essentially became slaves. They were stripped of their women. They constantly worked and were not even given a miserable scrap of land. To make matters worse, one of the sailors named McCoy learned to distill spirits from local plants. And to the already strong tension among the crew, widespread drunkenness was added. And then, a very important event occurs. Within the first year on the island, the Tahitian wives of sailors John Williams and John Adams die. And the Englishmen took 2 women from the Tahitians, whom they, by the way, considered their wives. The Tahitian men were left with only 1 woman. As a result of all these unjust actions, the Tahitian men conspired to kill the Englishmen at night. However, the women betrayed them and told everything to the sailors. As a result, 2 out of the 6 Tahitians were killed. Only 4 remained, and they again fell into slavery. By September 1793, several children had already been born on the island. The 4 remaining Polynesian men now had only 1 woman. According to some accounts, her name was Mareva. The English treated them worse and worse, and on October 3rd, 1793, the Tahitian men rose in rebellion among the mutineers. Their first victim was John Williams. He was followed by Fletcher Christian, John Mills, Isaac Martin, and William Brown. One of the sailors, John Adams, was wounded but managed to survive and hid in the jungles with 3 of his English companions. And then, real madness began. The Tahitians turned out to be no better than the English. Some sources write that the Tahitian women killed the Tahitian men at night because they turned out to be even more cruel than the Englishmen. However, this is not quite true. The Tahitians simply started a massacre among themselves from the possession of women and land. Moreover, the 4 Englishmen who were hiding in the jungles did not sit idle and wanted to return the island to their control. Pitcairn Island again passed to the English. There were only 4 Englishmen left among the men on the island. The islanders became Edward Young, Matthew Quintal, John Adams, and William McCoy, as well as 10 women and their children. The next 5 years passed relatively peacefully. Only McCoy, as I already said, learned to distill liquor from the tea root, scaled up his production, and eventually the sailors drunk themselves into delirium tremens. McCoy himself tied a stone around his neck and in a fit of delirium tremens threw himself off a cliff into the sea. In 1799, a drunk Matthew Quintal, in a fit of delirium tremens, attacked his companions and was killed by Edward Young and John Adams. Another year later, Edward Young, who suffered from asthma, also died, leaving John Adams the last man on the island. Adams fell into despair and went on a fierce binge. During another fit of delirium tremens, he saw vivid hallucinations and apparently experienced some kind of religious ecstasy. And the next morning, John Adams destroyed the distilling apparatus and told the women and children that from now on they would live strictly according to the Holy Scriptures. And they didn't resist much. Overall, the survival of their colony was entirely on the shoulders of women, since the men were constantly drinking and killing each other. In 1814, when a ship with Englishmen approached Pitcairn, the entire population of the island would come to greet them. Adams, 10 Tahitian women, and 24 mixed-race children. By that time, he had taught the children to read and write using the only book they had, the Bible, which is still preserved on the island to this day. The British authorities would pardon Adams. He died on the island in 1829, revered as the patriarch and founder of the Pitcairn community. After the death of the leader, the residents of Pitcairn seriously considered their future. The settlement was growing, and there were fears that the island would not be able to feed everyone. The islanders tried to relocate twice, but each time homesickness brought them back to Pitcairn. Ironically, the island settled by mutineers continued to attract adventurers from all over the world. In October 1832, an American preacher named Joshua Hill arrived. Claiming to be a representative of the British authorities, he took up both main positions on the island, as pastor and school teacher. Hill also built a prison on the island and arranged public floggings from the dissatisfied. Worse still, he banned alcohol. The overthrow of the tyranny occurred surprisingly peacefully. The exposed impostor was removed from his position and expelled. To prevent a recurrence, the islanders adopted a constitution. Elections were to be held annually. All adult residents, including women, were allowed to vote. On the continents, women were yet to achieve this right. Half a century later, another wanderer arrived in Pitcairn, an Adventist missionary named John Tay. The population voted that he could stay and try to explain his faith. Tay explained more than convincingly. In 1890, all the residents of the island became Seventh-day Adventists. The new confession did not greatly change their daily life. Ever since the time of John Adams, the islanders were very pious. After the conversion to the new religion, only the local pigs suffered. Adventism forbids eating pork, so to avoid temptation, they were all slaughtered. Having lived the 20th century in strict piety, in 2004, the Pitcairn community experienced a serious shock. A third of the island's men, including the mayor, have been accused of molesting children. Opinions on the island were divided. Some argued that with girls 12 and 14 years old has been a good tradition since the time of John Adams. Others insisted that such savagery must be eradicated. The defense tried to prove that British laws do not apply in Pitcairn, so pedophiles cannot even be tried. But the Supreme Court of the island, which was specially convened for a high-profile case, ruled, Pitcairn is British territory and criminals will be punished according to its laws. Most of the defendants received between 2 and 6 years. A prison was built on the island for the second time. Do you think it helped? No. Today, just over 50 people live on Pitcairn. The UK government has been trying for 10 years to attract new settlers, but so far there has only been one willing one.